Last night, my friend and I were bar hopping on Pink Street in Lisbon. I'm listing the location because I think this guy will try and pull the same shit again with another person. While walking to another bar, we met a guy named Armando. He seemed genuine and sweet, so we had casual conversation for a few minutes before heading inside. During the conversation, he said, "Be careful in Lisbon, you are not as safe as you may think." While it struck me as odd, I thought the cultural or language barrier was the reason for the way he said it. I thought he was just trying to remind me to be safe. It should also be mentioned that at this point I was pretty drunk, as it's about 1 hour till bar close time. We split up and heads into the next bar and continue to take shots with other bar hoppers. Armando pops up at the bar we're at, and at this point there was no suspicion. He buys me a shot or two and we take like 2 selfies and all is good. Some time passes and I'm dancing and talking with another guy who I'll call Mr. Brown. My friend and I continue to meet other people and keep dancing until bar closing. After closing, my friend and I separate ourselves from the crowd so the Uber can find us easily. Armando approaches us and says to add him on Instagram, as his phone was dead, so I let him type his name into mine, so he instantly swiped up to the main screen and called himself on my phone. He goes to call a second number, which at this point I stop him and say no, 1 number is enough. I take my phone back and we engage in very light conversation while waiting for our Uber. We were slightly annoyed, but my guard was down, so I didn't feel afraid. I typically have very strong intuition, so I'm sure the drinking impaired my judgment heavily. Eventually we get him to leave and our Uber shows up. The night was over and I was ready for bed. When I woke up this morning, my friend told me that she had a very horrible feeling about him. Well, I received a message from Mr. Brown on Insta this afternoon saying, "Your boyfriend almost got hurt last night when he pulled a knife on me." I replied to say that my boyfriend wasn't at the bar, so it couldn't have been him. I was able to send a selfie to Mr. Brown for confirmation that it was Armando. It was. I'm just really freaked out right now and I have to share this. If you're on Pink Street and a guy named Armando approaches you, he wasn't with anyone. We initially thought he was on his way up to meet friends. Pay absolutely no attention to him. And Armando, if you're reading this, let's never meet again. I have always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night, and the safety offered by a house and light. I'd never had anything to base this fear on, until a night I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, and I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green right when you decide to just run it. Of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night, but earlier that week I heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking," and, for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look at my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and all my windows were up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator, just in case, and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would just be an awkward exchange, and she was praying for a quick light change before she reached me. So, I just get out of there. I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window and put her bag down and began to tap on the window. I nervously looked up at her, and she motioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button, and the whole thing just came down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she did not seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief description of this lady. She was small and skinny and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20-plus years on the street, or she was a 60-something-year-old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not by a boyfriend, but there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, and like she was disconnected from the moment that made my skin crawl. And after a brief, about a second, debate on whether I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and could not give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time I felt more confident, and I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. "My boyfriend beat me." At this point, the light changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, then looked down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the right decision." She then picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since, and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark. When I was in college, I spent my summers working at a popular home improvement store. I loved working there and would totally go back. I was a cashier, and more often than not I was put in the outdoor selection, or lumber, because I was self-sufficient and didn't cause trouble. Additionally, I almost always, 5 out of 7 of my shifts, worked the closing shift, which was 3 till 11. The second summer I worked there, I was 20 years old. It wasn't unusual for men to ask for my number or give me theirs, but this is the only one I remember. One night it was me and another male cashier in the lumber section. This man, probably in his mid-40s, came through my line and was friendly, but I didn't think anything of it, because those customers were typically friendly construction workers. He asked me a couple of questions about myself, how long I worked there, how my day was going, etc. Nothing unusual. 10 minutes later, the same guy came through my line to buy gum. A little suspicious, but I didn't think too much of it. He asked me a few more questions, and he figured out we were originally from the same town in the northeast. Interesting, but not uncommon. He talked to me for about 10 minutes. He was definitely taking advantage of the fact that the store was basically empty, before finally leaving. I remember thinking, thank God he's finally gone, because I got a weird feeling when he wouldn't leave after buying gum. As you may have guessed, my co-worker until this point has done absolutely nothing but sit on his stool and look at me occasionally. Anyway, after the dude left, I started working on closing duties so I didn't have to do them later. Fast forward another 10 minutes, the same dude walks in, again. This time he makes a beeline directly to my register. Not a good feeling. He goes, "Hey, so I just wanted to give you my number. You're just beautiful." And I said, "No thank you." He goes, "Oh come on, just call me and we can get drinks sometime." Brilliant young woman I am. "Oh, I don't think so. I'm only 20. thinking this would deter him. Of course, he says, "That's okay that you're 20, we'll get juice then," and proceeds to rip off some receipt paper from my register to write his number on. I just stared at him until he finally walked away, which felt like 2 hours. I was so uncomfortable and threw that piece of paper out before he even got out the door. The worst part of the whole story is, remember how I mentioned there was another cashier with me? Yeah, after Creepy Dude left, he said, "I was wondering how long it was going to take for him to ask you out," and then started laughing. I told a female co-worker what happened, and she was upset for me. Later that day, one of my managers came up to me and told me that if this ever happened again, I shouldn't go to my car alone. Silly 20-year-old me hadn't even considered the fact that the creep could have been waiting in his car for me to get off work. I think I saw the guy one more time that the summer he didn't see me, thankfully. So, to the creepy juice man, let's not meet again. This happened to me during the summer between middle school and high school. My drug addict older brother Jason had just moved out of my mum's garage. They'd had a falling out over something, and it was a relief when he was gone. Not long after that, I moved into the garage in his place. I'd only been living there less than a week when it happened. I was vegging on some good old-fashioned MMO gaming with a group of friends when I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Since the door to the garage was separate from the house, I stepped onto the porch and went over to the backslider. There was a sticky note on it that informed me my family had gone to the store and would be back soon. This immediately made me nervous, as I would have preferred to have been told, but I brushed it off and went inside. Our two large dogs, Bella and Sadie, harmless but intimidating, were sleeping behind a baby gate, separated into my mum's room and what was once mine, but now in the process of being made into a playroom for my 3-year-old niece, Kate. There wasn't really much furniture in it, other than some toys and 2 pushchairs. So the door was closed to discourage the dogs from going in there. They weren't destructive and were allowed to roam as they wanted to for the most part, but one of them, Bella, had a habit of eating whatever she could find. So when we weren't home, they were usually crated or kept out of places they could eat things, aka the kitchen. The bathroom door was just before the gate, so I said hello and went in. I closed the door, locked it, did my business and washed my hands. After that, since I was there, I grabbed hold of my hairbrush. Then I haired it. I thought I was crazy at first. Sometimes I wonder if I still am. The latchable door to the baby gate clicked open, which isn't something any of our animals were capable of doing. I heard movement before the distinct sound of dog collars passing by the door. Bella and her sister Sadie didn't bark or growl, they just rushed by, straight toward the kitchen. I was paralysed with fear and didn't dare move. I held my breath with a hand over my mouth, extremely worried. Our dogs were lovable, but if this had been a stranger, they would have been barking. Whoever had let them out of the gate knew them. I tried to tell myself maybe it was my family, but considering they had all gone, they weren't exactly the type of people to come home quietly. I knew that was a mistake. It got worse from there, and I will never forget the sound of the bedroom door that was mine less than a week ago creaking open slowly. There was a long pause, and then I heard either Bella or Sadie come close to the gate again briefly, before she went back towards the kitchen. What felt like an eternity passed in complete, deafening silence, only to be stopped suddenly by an echo of the baby gate clicking shut. It seemed like hours until I could hear the back door slide open and closed, followed by more silence. I didn't move. What was I supposed to do? There was no telling if whoever was in there actually had left or not. And at the time, it wasn't exactly common for people to have cell phones, especially kids my age, so I had no way of contacting my family or even calling the police. Eventually, I worked up the nerve and pushed the door open. Almost immediately, Bella and Sadie ran up to me for attention before wandering off again, seeming unfazed, but still on the opposite side of the gate that they had been on before I'd entered the bathroom. The door to Kate's new playroom was open just a bit, enough for someone to peer inside, despite having been closed before that. I convinced myself that it was all in my head, but hid in the bathroom until I heard my family come home. After explaining what had happened, the police were called and canvassed the area, but they found nothing. Our home backed up to a park that was notorious for suspicious night activity, so anyone could have hopped the fence easily. My mother had a theory that it was probably just Jason trying to break in and steal money for more drugs, and I didn't argue, but I didn't agree with her. If it had been Jason, it would have been more unnerving that the person in question had only looked in the room that was once mine, and hadn't seemed to be shifting around, looking for money. I was a teenager, I didn't exactly have money in there. Deep down, I was terrified it was one of Jason's creepy, old drug addict friends that he always bought by. They were always really unnerving and stared at me in ways which made me extremely uncomfortable. I was scared that they were stalking my house and saw my family leave without me. And since they wouldn't have known I was in the garage, I'd taken down the "we're going to the store" note. It probably looked as if I was home alone and in my room. I hate to think what would have happened had I been there. I don't even know if this really happened or if I was overreacting. But, to the person who walked into my place and was comfortable enough that my dogs didn't react, let's not meet again. A little bit of backstory. I'm a 22-year-old male student in the Midlands of England. I'm currently living in the halls of residence, and recently there have been reports of people being assaulted, mainly females, when they have been walking alone or in small groups at night times when they are on their way back from nightclubs and pubs, etc. Tonight is a Saturday, and due to being out last night, I was feeling pretty hungover still, so I made my way down to the supermarket to get myself some painkillers and a few other things I needed from there. So as I'm coming out of the supermarket, which is approximately an 8-minute walk from my campus, I'm putting my headphones in and I passed two girls who were crying, and I'm pretty certain one of them was looking my way when she said the words, "Be careful up there." Now at the time I didn't really think anything of it, and I just thought they may have been drunk, and hey, they might not even have been talking to me. So I'm walking up the long road which my campus is on, and it's surprisingly quiet, and the road is literally dead, apart from 3 average-sized males walking my way from the distance on the same side of the road. I cross the road and I'm scrolling on my phone as I normally do when I'm walking. I look up very briefly to see that these men have also crossed the road and are looking at me as I'm now 15 feet away from them. This is kind of making me a little anxious, as there's literally nobody else around. As they reach me, one of them says, "Good evening." These men look Eastern European and in their mid to late 30s, wearing casual attire, jeans, bomber jackets and trainers. As I proceed to say, "I'm in a rush, sorry," another one of the group steps across my path. I don't know if this was meant in an intimidating manner, but red flags are going off in my head right now. The man who spoke to me is holding what appear to be flyers, so I'm thinking that they may be promoters or something. I lower my headphones so I can hear what he is saying. The man proceeds me to ask how old I am and what I'm studying. I tell him that I'm 22 and I'm studying forensic science. The man then proceeds to ask me if I have a girlfriend. I tell him that I do not. At this point, I break eye contact with the male that is talking to me and glance at the third man who appears to be fidgeting with something in his hand, and in his left hand he is holding a relatively large Swiss Army knife. At this point, I'm pretty panicked. The main male then asks me in this thick European accent where they can find the girls. I tell him that I don't really know and try to proceed away from the men. This is when the guy standing in my way doesn't move and I physically walk into him. Now, I'm not the biggest of guys, but I wouldn't say I'm small. I'm 5'11" and around 190 pounds. But I'm not in any way a fighter or a confrontational person, so I'm getting a little afraid at this point, as these men are obviously looking for trouble. The main male then asks me a question that frankly scares me. He asks me if I know any females under 18 in this area. I then tell him that I don't, and he nods. He now appears to be getting agitated for some reason, and I'm now probably visibly shaking. The man asks me what is in my shopping bag, and he ushers me to show him what is in it. I tell him that it's just general groceries. The man slightly pushes my shoulder and asks if I have younger sisters that are here, and I tell him that I have no younger siblings at all. The main male frowns at me in quite a sinister manner. Now, I don't know what was going to happen after this point, but from behind me I hear chatter and laughter, and the men look, as do I, in the direction, and to my relief, it's a group of 7 people, both male and female. A wave of relief passes over me, as this dead street now has people on it. The main male then proceeds to ask me another question, but the man standing in my way says something along the lines of "Idimo, idimo, idimo," which I googled, and it is the Bosnian word for go. When he was saying this, he was pushing the arm of the man with the Swiss Army knife. The group of people are now about 20 feet away from us, and I gained the courage to tell these men that I'm in a rush, and forcefully shove past the man in my way, and speed walk back to campus, which is around 100 metres away from me, straight to my building, and straight to my room. Now, I'm sorry if this has been longer than it needed to be, but I wanted to give exact details of this event and how I was feeling as it transpired. Thinking back, the reports of the female assaults and those girls that were saying be careful as I came out the supermarket now appear significant. Now, I'm not saying these guys are culpable for the assaults around the university campus, but it just made me think about these events for some reason. I feel so relieved and lucky that the group of people were coming up the road, as I don't know what could have happened to me if that group hadn't been coming up the road at that time. I still fear why one of them said the word go. Was he urging the other man to stab me? Or was he urging his group to move on and abort their mission, so to speak? It was just the general way in which these men spoke to me, and the manner in which one of them blocked my path, and they kinda just surrounded me. I don't think these guys' intentions were good, and I don't know if I'm being paranoid or overreacting, but the questions these men were asking aren't normal questions. Sorry for the long ramble, I'm just shocked by this and just wanted to share it. So, to the 3 Eastern European guys that surrounded me in the street, let's not meet.